The Oort Perimeter, by Stephen Lake. Earthfleet Saga, Book 1. Dedication. I want to dedicate this book first to God for His boundless grace in blessing me with the ability to write, and the imagination by which to create all the great worlds, characters, events and stories that I have had the privilege to write about. I also want to send out a huge thanks to all my friends and family who helped me edit my book, provided feedback, or gave me ideas for my stories. Thanks for all the great assistance that you provided. Prologue. A short, plump, elderly monk, his skin green and leathery, stood on a balcony at the top of a large stone tower that overlooked a wide and expansive courtyard below him, and studied the numerous people that moved about it, each one going about their own unique religious errands. But, despite the many people who were gathered there, they were only a tiny sampling of the vast multitude who called this place home. But this was no ordinary home away from home. This was the chief monastery of the ISBN, an ecumenical organization that brought together the beliefs and religious customs of thousands of religions from across the galaxy into one location. In doing so, it had become a tapestry of cultures that was both breathtakingly beautiful and surprisingly simple at the same time. As the monk continued to look down from the top of the tower, a warm summer breeze wafted through the room around him, sending a small cloud of dust swirling up around his feet like a dirty brown whirlpool. Yet his robe appeared to take no notice of this, as it remained surprisingly still despite the strength of the breeze. He soon reached up and adjusted the hood of his robe, pulling it further over his face as though drawing deeper into the shadows within. He brushed lightly at the simple brown cloth it was made of, and then tightened the rope-like belt around his waist that held it in place. After a moment he turned and studied the room behind him. It was made entirely of an emerald green marble, surrounded by a circle of 36 pillars that appeared old and scarred with time despite their relative youth. A group of small birds, that were nesting in the domed roof above him, chirped and sang happily in tune with the numerous evening chants and prayers that echoed up from the monastery below. The monk inhaled deeply as the smell of flowers drifted through the air around him, giving the air a sweet, almost perfume-like fragrance. In the distance, the planet's twin suns slowly marched across the sky towards the horizon as they began their descent into evening. The monk glanced briefly at the room around him, before again looking out at the courtyard. Given the lateness of the hour, it made him wonder if the others would ever arrive. But, just as quickly as this thought entered his mind, the sound of footsteps echoed from the stairway below. He turned and soon spotted 8 other monks in robes of various colors and designs entering the room through a nearby gilded archway. They slowly and reverently formed a circle around a large, black orb that sat perched on a pedestal of pure white marble in the center of the room. The green-skinned monk soon joined them as the other monks began to chant quietly to themselves. This went on for several minutes before everyone fell silent, and then turned their attention to the one among their group who was dressed in a light green cloak that was covered in a variety of aquatic symbols that denoted his position as a prophet of his people. "What is your message today, prophet? Why have you called this meeting?" asked one of the monks in a deep, solemn voice. "A great danger arises from within our midst," said the monk in the green cloak, his voice dark and menacing. "What kind of danger?" asked another. "A race has arisen from within our vast community who seeks to destroy the Nine, and seize the galaxy for their own." The other monks looked at each other in surprise and perplexity. "Who are they?" asked one of them. The prophet raised his hand and waved it over the orb. It then shimmered and changed to reveal a picture of Earth. "It is the Chapaji. They will conquer us all and destroy the peace that we, of the Nine, have fought so hard to achieve," he hissed spitefully. "That is absurd. The 9 races have stood as guardians of the sentient worlds for millennia. There is no way that an insignificant race such as them could ever overthrow us." "You are a fool if you believe they have such strength," shouted one of the monks. The prophet glared at the other 8 from under the darkness of his hood. "I am a master prophet, of the great house of prophets. We have never been wrong. We correctly predicted the betrayal of Severin and the attack of the Erigians. Our people have been accurately prophesying the truth for over 2 millennia, and I tell you now, unless they are destroyed quickly, the Chapaji will overthrow us all. They will conquer the Nine and put every creature in this galaxy under their feet." The other 8 monks quietly, but vigorously, discussed this revelation among themselves for several moments. Eventually, one of the 8, the plump, elderly monk, who'd been first to reach the top of the tower, stepped forward and threw back his hood to reveal the reptilian face of Agaic Vaughn. "Who has sent you to speak such lies and evil against the jinn?" he demanded. "They are not lies." "I speak the truth," cried the prophet, a quiet gurgle in his voice. "You do not speak the truth." "I know, for I have seen the jinn myself, and know of their nature. They are a peaceful people who possess no lust for power, nor a desire for conquest. It is true that they've grown powerful. But it is out of fear of you and your people. Fear breeds fear, and fear leads to suffering, and death. Yes, their death. They must die," cried the prophet. "No. We will not sanction this prophecy, nor the genocide of an entire race, on the simple word of a prophet whose own species has much to gain from their slaughter." The prophet fumed bitterly. "How dare you question my prophecy? You know as well as anyone that all which I foretell will come to pass. I do not fear your prophecy, nor you, prophet, if I should call you that, as your very words reveal the true motives for your proclamation. It is not the declaration of a revelation, but rather the dark desires of your heart, which is fueled by greed, and a lust for power. Therefore, as leader of this council, I declare that your title as prophet be hereby stricken from the record, and your prophecies be declared as heresy until such time as you return to your sanity, and once more embrace the truth." The prophet hissed. "Fools! You risk your own destruction at the hands of these monsters. If they truly were monsters, and our eyes each saw the same future as you do, then we would agree with your verdict. But our eyes see a different truth. We see a race still in its infancy, who is trying to stand up and walk in a world full of giants. That is why your prophecy cannot be the truth. There is no possibility that such a tiny race can be of any threat to us. Therefore, I declare to you, go now and seek cleansing for your sins, lest the darkness in your heart consume you." The prophet threw back his hood to reveal the fish-like face of a Varnock. He pointed angrily at the Gaec Von monk and growled. "Then their victory has already begun, and your doom sealed," he hissed. "And again you speak folly to us. Tell me, O foolish one, of what victory have they gained against us? I see nothing that says we have been, nor ever will be, cast beneath their feet, nor forced to bow in subservience to them," said the Gaec Von. The Varnock prophet hissed again. "Do you not see? They have already divided the 9 races, and turned us against each other. Without our unity, their victory is assured. The only question that remains now is the season of our destruction." The Gaec Von monk retreated several steps, putting space between himself and the Varnock prophet. 4 other monks turned and joined him to show that they stood in agreement with him. The 3 monks that remained gathered themselves around the Varnock prophet, as though to defy the Gaec Von. "Is this not proof enough for you that they have already divided us, and taken away our unity? Open your eyes, you old fool, and see the truth that stands before you, lest your blindness become the death of us all," hissed the Varnock prophet. "You are the only fool here, prophet. This division is not their doing, but yours alone." The Varnock prophet wagged a finger angrily at him. "Mark my words. Your fall will be the greatest of the 9, for you will be the first to suffer at their hands." The Gaec Von monk snorted. "We shall see who will fall and who will remain, prophet. But, understand this. So long as our 5 races exist to stand against your unholy union of 4, the jinn will remain safe, even if we must fight to our last dying breath to protect them." The Varnock prophet glared at him, and said darkly, "We shall see." Chapter 1. Chancellor Nordham was a man of science just as much as he was a man of politics. While he didn't directly conduct any experiments of his own, he was a great lover of the scientific disciplines, and oversaw a vast community of scientists and researchers consisting of the most brilliant and exceptional human minds in all of Seoul. Here, within the Braeburn Society, they were free to push the bounds of science unhindered and unrestrained, save for a simple code of ethics that called for everyone to always seek the best for mankind, and never its harm. But this scientific freedom hadn't always existed. In times past, science had been feared by man, and those who explored its incredible wonders were treated as heretics, and often killed or tortured for their convictions. To combat this fear, many of those who clung to and practiced science banded together for strength and mutual security, eventually forming the Braeburn Society, which became a collection of the greatest minds in all of humanity. Under its protective umbrella, science grew and prospered, diseases and sicknesses were wiped out, and many great breakthroughs, once thought impossible by many on Earth, became reality. Even spaceflight and interplanetary colonization were achieved long before the Wright brothers first left the ground at Kitty Hawk. As they continued forward, always striving to learn, to grow, to expand their already vast knowledge, and create newer and better technology, the world around them slowly began to change, to accept science as a natural part of their daily lives, and to move down a path the society had long desired for them to go. But, even then, those among the society were highly persecuted. As a result, they'd fled the confines of polite society, and eventually Earth itself, centuries earlier, and had chosen instead to colonize the other worlds of our solar system where they would be free to search out the mysteries of the galaxy unimpeded. This was made possible through hard work and a chance encounter with the Gaekvans several centuries earlier. Even so, the people of the society loved it, as it took the freedom they'd already gained, and enhanced it 100-fold. But this freedom came with a price. Technological advancement was rapid, and one form of technology was quickly obsolesced by the next. But to those of the society, such rapid change was expected, and treated as just another part of their daily lives. However, to someone on Earth, accustomed to the slow and comparatively snail-like pace of technological evolution, the speed at which the societies grew was nothing short of miraculous. And it was this incredible and rapid technological growth that Nordum had grown up around, and had learned to deal with. Even so, being the chancellor of such a vast community of exceptional and brilliant minds was both humbling and exhausting. While criminal and social woes were nearly unheard of within the society, there were still many things that required his daily attention. And today was no exception. As he sat behind his desk and studied an operations report on a large data pad in his hand, one of his assistants came through the door with a look on his face that made Nordum groan. Even though the assistant carried nothing in his hands, the expression on his face told Nordum everything. More work had just come in, and it wasn't a trivial amount either. More, he said with a hint of frustration. The assistant grinned sheepishly. Sorry, sir, but they've been coming in like this all morning, he said. Nordum frowned. How much more do you have out there? He asked. The assistant shrugged, and then gestured in the air, calling up a multi-part holographic display in front of himself. Just over 100 new reports so far, on top of the over 200 that are already in queue to be reviewed, sir. Nordum's eyes narrowed in disbelief. Unbelievable. We're a completely paperless society, and yet I'm up to my eyeballs in paperwork. How is that possible? He said sarcastically. The assistant shrugged, and then dismissed the displays. I don't know, sir, and I can understand your frustration in this, as I'd be frustrated too were I in your position, he replied. Nordum smirked. Saying I'm frustrated is an understatement. To be honest, I'd rather just ship these back to the directors and let them deal with them instead. Well, you could, sir, said the assistant. What, and let the council say I was wrong? Are you kidding? Grinned Nordum. The assistant chuckled. Right, good point. Well, if it's all right with you, I'd like to grab a few of the interns and see if we can sort through these and figure out which of them are just empty reports, and which are things you actually need to pay attention to. Yes, please do. The assistant bowed slightly, and then slipped out of the room. Nordum sighed as he rubbed his forehead in frustration. Just then a chime echoed softly in the room as a large holographic screen appeared above his desk. On it was a high-priority message addressed to him. He briefly studied it, and then furrowed his brow. Well. It appears I was right. Computer, inform the reception group that I will be changing the meeting venue for the Syrian diplomats to Pluto Station. Also, please inform the Grand Admiral of the change. Acknowledged, replied the computer. Nordum tossed the data pad in his hand onto the desk, and then said, "All right, let's go do some political peacocking, shall we?" Grand Admiral Mike Clayton, Supreme Commander of Earthfleet, the defensive military arm of the Brayburn Society charged with protecting Earth from all threats local and galactic, and all of Sol by extension, sat quietly on a pillowed davenport in the living room of his officers' quarters. In front of him floated a gigantic holographic display screen, on which played a broadcast from the BBC detailing the day's political highlights. Today U.S. President Westland openly denounced German Chancellor Siegfried on international television for his support of the Lansing Accord. Chancellor Siegfried immediately retorted saying that President Westland's claims were the sign of a weak leadership afraid that it will lose its bid for world domination, said the news reporter. Mike quietly sipped on a cup of dark, black coffee as he continued to watch the news. Alfred Bofenheiser, Vice Grand Admiral of Earthfleet, and Mike's executive officer, sat next to him and fumed as he watched the news report. Mike gestured lightly in the air, muting the display, and then turned to Alfred with a grin. "Something the matter?" he asked. "World politics makes me so angry. It's like listening to a bunch of preschoolers arguing over who will get the last piece of candy," said Alfred with a light German accent. Mike chuckled. "Well, not everyone grows up, no matter how old they are. It almost makes you wish you could send them back to preschool and make them start all over again." Alfred grinned. "It's a nice dream, but I doubt it would work." He then looked back at the news broadcast just as a series of images appeared on the screen showing waves of violence that were increasing across the planet. "It's so depressing to see them acting like savages to each other. It seems like all our efforts to show them a better way have been in vain," he continued with a sigh. "It does get frustrating at times, doesn't it?" said Mike. Alfred nodded. "It does." Mike glanced briefly at his watch before dismissing the holographic display in front of him. "Well, it's almost time to go meet the Syrian diplomats," he said, a hint of loathing clearly evident in his voice. "More political babysitting again, eh?" chided Alfred. Mike grunted. "If only. It's days like this that make me wish I wasn't Grand Admiral. I mean, it's not as if I don't love the job. I just hate all the politics that come with it. Half of this stuff would give a man gray hair before he's 40. I feel your pain, my friend. Anyhow, speaking of politics, I had better get up to command and be sure that everything is in order before the councilmen arrive. We always have to look preened and pretty for the bureaucrats." Mike laughed. "Yeah, like meat on display." Alfred rolled his eyes at this. "Unfortunately," he replied. He then got up and slipped out of Mike's quarters. Mike then stood up and adjusted his outfit as he considered his next move. As much as he liked his casual work khakis, diplomatic encounters required that he be dressed in his best. "Well, time to change into the penguin suit," he thought to himself. Just then, a curious, quizzical voice echoed in his ears. "More politics?" it said. Mike turned slightly and spotted a tall, beautiful young woman with long, golden brown hair and royal blue eyes standing behind him wearing a simple blue dress. "You could say that. But one thing you learn right away about being the highest-ranking officer in Earthfleet is that playing politics is an unfortunate part of the job. Everyone seems to think that, despite your position and experience as a military officer, you're the perfect target for small talk, verbal chess, and political bantering. Personally, I'd rather challenge them to a friendly game of rugby than get dressed up and prance around like a peacock." The young woman nodded. "I've noticed a similar sentiment as well from both humans, and the many alien species we have thus had contact with. To each of them politics is a game of power, prestige and sleight of hand. Some enjoy it, while others, like yourself, do not." Mike chuckled. "I always see it as a battle of the ticks. He who can suck the most blood wins." The young woman grinned. "Given what happens at these meetings, one would be expected to think as much," she said. Just then a small communicator embedded in Mike's ear chirped. "Call from Central Dispatch," came a soft feminine. He pressed a finger against his lower right earlobe and said, "Clayton here." sir, the Chancellor wishes for you to meet him at Pluto Station. He says there's been a change of venue and they'll now be meeting the dignitaries there," came a voice in his ear. Mike cocked an eyebrow. "Any reason for the sudden change?" he asked. "He did not say, sir." "All right, tell him I'll be there as soon as I can." "Aye, sir." The call ended. Mike then looked at the young woman. "It seems we have a change of venue," he said. "So I heard. Shall I prepare your ship and summon the crew?" Mike held up his hand. "Not just yet. I want to find out why we're changing venues first. And, even then, we really don't need to take the Sir Genius out as we're only going to Pluto Station. It's not that far, so I can just portal over there." "As you wish." Mike then pressed his ear again, and said, "Connect me to Chancellor Nordum." "Connecting now," came the soft feminine voice of the central computer in his ear. A few moments later the Chancellor answered. "Yes, Grand Admiral." "How can I help you?" said Nordum. "I just got notification that the venue for meeting the diplomats has changed to Pluto Station." "What's the story behind that?" "I was notified by our intelligence director that there is a potential spy among the Syrians. Because of that, I want to restrict them to Pluto Station for now until we can be certain they present no danger to us." "Great. They're not even here yet and we're already playing Galactic Cloak and Dagger," muttered Mike. "So, by changing venues, we're essentially giving them a pat-down before they're allowed into the inner system," he continued. "Well, not in a literal sense, but definitely something close to that." Mike looked at the young woman and cocked an eyebrow. "All right, I'll be there as soon as I can. Clayton out." He then stood quietly for a moment and pondered this. As he did, the young woman looked at him curiously as he considered his options. "What's on your mind?" she asked. Mike pursed his lips slightly. Anytime a diplomatic meeting starts out like this, things usually get sticky in a hurry. Plus, if the director thinks there's a spy in the Syrian mission, it immediately turns this from simple diplomacy into a hostile confrontation. The young woman furrowed her brow. If this is indeed a hostile confrontation, wouldn't that, in turn, require the political equivalent of a retaliatory strike? She asked. Mike's eyes darted over to the young woman's seemingly mute, expressionless face, and pondered her words. "A political counterstrike, eh? My instructors once taught me that the best way to deal with a hostile political opponent is to kill them with kindness, giving everyone the perception that you're the better man, which, in turn, gives you the advantage. So, if they do have a spy in their midst, then they're either after information on how to destroy us, or perhaps searching for something that'll make us look bad." The young woman furrowed her brow. "Then shouldn't we kill them with kindness, as you say, the moment they get here?" Mike nodded. "I think we should. And the best way to do that is to begin with a personal escort from the Grand Admiral himself. As such we'll need the Sir Genius. So go ahead and call the crew. Just don't tell them what we're doing. I'll reveal that to them later." "Aye, sir," said the young woman. "And what about your dress uniform? Don't you want to look your best when you meet them?" Mike paused for a moment, and then looked down at his khakis. "Ah, right. I don't want to forget about that. Hey, if Petrov is in the area, tell him swing by and help me get dressed. After that I'll meet you on the ship." The woman nodded. "As you wish, sir," replied the young woman. She then shimmered and vanished from view. Lieutenant Pendleton, a seasoned fighter pilot with an edge about him that made most commanders cringe, was smart and fearless, but very reckless as well in many ways. Yet, despite this reputation, he'd succeeded in becoming the pilot of the Sir Genius, the flagship of Grand Admiral Clayton, which was the most coveted job in all of Earthfleet. And, while most commanders within the fleet felt that Mike's choice in pilots, namely Pendleton, had been foolish, Mike felt differently. He'd watched Pendleton from an early age, and knew how much of an asset his seemingly reckless flying style could be. He felt that this edge, which so scared the other commanders, actually made Pendleton the best pilot to have in a pinch, because he would be more willing to do everything necessary to ensure his survival, and also those under his care, than most other pilots. But flying wasn't Pendleton's only passion. He loved to race, and today was no exception. Having the day off from his regular duties, he'd begun the arduous process of getting his ship ready for the next running of the famous, and sometimes infamous, Rock Belt Race, which was held by Earthfleet every couple of months. This was the race of races in soul space, a race designed to test the skills and mental of the best pilots in the system. On a handful of occasions it had even been opened up to a few select pilots from outside of Seoul as well. As Pendleton carefully tinkered inside of his JX-1 fighter, the ship of choice for all racers of any real skill or experience, a technician, who was helping him with his modifications and maintenance, let out a sigh and a grunt of frustration. "She's not going any higher, sir," he said. Pendleton leaned incredulously out of the lower left engine cowling of his fighter, and looked down at the technician with an expression of frustration. "What do you mean she's not going any higher? This unit should be able to give us twice as much power as this," he grumbled. "Fleet specs say that the 701 unit isn't allowed to go beyond 0.05/71. Especially when the spec limit is 0.07/68. Anything more and you risk catastrophic failure of the plasma booster, which could result in your death. Or, at the very least, an extremely painful flank speed ejection from your fighter, if you get my drift," said the technician. Pendleton snorted. "That's nonsense and you know it," he snapped. "Well, I'm not going to break regulation and adjust the unit any higher than it already is without first getting written permission from my commander." Pendleton flipped himself out of the engine cowling and down to the deck. "Fine. If you're not going to do it, then I will," he snapped. "But that would be, hey, it's my personal fighter. Let me worry about what's over spec and what's not, okay? You're just here to help me get her tuned up for the next Rock Belt race, got it?" The technician rolled his eyes and stepped aside as Pendleton walked over to a nearby console and made several adjustments. "It's your butt if it blows, not mine," said the technician. Pendleton smirked. "That's kind of the idea, crewman, as it'll be my butt in the seat. So you have no problems with blowing yourself to space dust then, eh?" Pendleton snorted. "Fat chance that'll happen." The technician rolled his eyes, but said nothing. As Pendleton worked to fine-tune his fighter, a finger reached over and tapped him on the shoulder. Pendleton turned in surprise to see a beautiful young woman in a simple, floor-length blue dress standing behind him. He frowned incredulously. "Ugh, it's you. What do you want? Don't you have someone else to harass?" he said as he returned to his work. "No, I don't. I'm here to summon you." "The Grand Admiral is in need of his pilot," she replied flatly. "Oh, really? And when does the old geezer want me?" he said. "About 20 minutes ago," she said flatly. Pendleton leapt up in surprise, banging his head against the bottom of the fighter. He doubled over in pain, swore loudly, and then stumbled out from under it. After a moment he stood up and groaned as he rubbed his head. 20 minutes ago. Good Lord, woman, why didn't you contact me?" he said. "I tried. But you switched off your communicator," said the woman flatly. Pendleton swore. "I was trying to keep Kemps from calling me all the time." He swore again, and then looked at his fighter. "Aw, geez. And right when I was on a roll, too. All right, crewman, just button her up and we'll finish this another day. Sarah, portal me to the ship." A moment later a grayish sphere of light surrounded him briefly, and then vanished, leaving the deck empty. At the same time, another identical sphere appeared on the bridge of the Sir Genius and then vanished as well, leaving Pendleton behind. Mike looked up at the lieutenant and raised an eyebrow in consternation. "Are you making a habit of being late, Mr. Pendleton?" asked Mike. Pendleton spun around and snapped to attention. "No, sir. I switched off my communicator because one of my friends kept calling me repeatedly and wouldn't stop. I couldn't work with him bothering me like that." Mike grinned. "Well, we'll worry about that later. For now, take your post, Lieutenant, and get us underway. I don't want to keep the Chancellor waiting any longer." "Aye, sir," said Pendleton. He then spun around, leapt into the pilot's seat, and flew across the controls. As he did, the young woman appeared next to Mike as he turned and smiled at her. "Thanks for grabbing him, Sarah. I appreciate it." The young woman smiled. "We can't exactly go anywhere without our pilot, now can we?" she replied. Mike laughed. "No, I don't suspect we could." "Well, we can, but it wouldn't be wise." "Indeed," replied the woman with a grin. She then scanned the bridge briefly before returning her attention to Mike. "What do you expect to find when you get there?" she asked. "As far as the ships they'll arrive in, I don't expect much. As for the diplomats, that's another story entirely. They'll almost certainly be poking us to see where we flinch, and then report those weaknesses to their bosses, whoever they are." "It's probably the Varnock," muttered Pendleton. Mike grunted. "Honestly, these days, it could be anyone. Given how much the Juna hate us, I'd be more willing to put money on them than the Varnock, although it could be either of them at this point. Especially the way things have been going lately. I don't know. What benefit would it be for the Juna to discover our weaknesses? It's not as if they have much of a military anymore. And, what little they do have is of no threat to us. The Varnock, on the other hand, are a different story. They not only have the means to harm us, but the desire to do so as well," said Sarah. Mike frowned. "Yeah, I know. And it doesn't make sense either. One moment they could care less about us, and the next, they, and half the galaxy, want to wipe us off the map, and for no good reason that we can determine." Sarah nodded. "I agree. Their bloodlust against you seems so, well, illogical." Mike chuckled. "Nobody ever said that hatred or xenophobia was logical. Besides, I wouldn't expect an AI like yourself to understand something as complex, or animalistic as hatred." Sarah grinned. "I understand more than you think I do." Just then Pendleton turned to Mike, and said, "Sir, we have clearance for departure." "Take us out then, Lieutenant." "Aye, sir." The Sir Genius soon lifted gracefully off the deck of the docking bay, retracted her landing gear, and shimmered out of view as she engaged her cloaking device. Pendleton then eased the ship forward and quickly slipped out into space. Within moments he switched on her coaxial drive and jumped out of the area,